Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to video game news live. I guess I maybe should be calling it live. Today is, well no I shouldn't, because sometimes I do upload the reruns of these. Today is May 1st, 2026. We're into May, not a month down. Another lack of progress compared to what I would have liked to have made for that month. Let's scroll down the SteamDB 24-hour peak chart. We'll do a little bit of warm-up and then we'll jump into the video game news. I don't know how much warm-up it really is going to be, because all I've really been doing is playing Blueprints, and almost everything I could say about Blueprints would be a spoiler for Blueprints, which I would prefer not to do on an unrelated video. But the stated goal of getting to room 46 in less than 45 days was accomplished by me in, I think, roughly 21 days. And honestly, if I hadn't made a stupid mistake that I'm still suffering from, in that I basically unlocked the door and didn't walk through the door, and if I had walked through the door, I probably would have gotten a permanent upgrade in the roguelite style that the game plays in. But because I didn't, the next day the door just was locked again, and it's fairly difficult to unlock that specific door. And I'm speaking kind of in code more than reality, figuratively speaking. So I'm still kind of suffering from that. Once you get to room 46, you pretty much know there is a lot more still to figure out when looking at the most wishlisted games. I'm really going to just burn through these today, I think. But yeah, there's a lot more to find. And funnily enough, there's like one place where you can find this fortune teller machine, and it will play these unique cutscenes for telling the future. And the second time I did that, it fortune told that there's going to straight up be an antagonist coming out of nowhere who's going to basically break into the estate and steal something. And yeah, that would be a very late reveal if that happened. I kind of expect it to. It also added a level of creepiness too, but yeah, inherently there is, I guess I'll spoil this a little bit. There's like one room in Blueprints where it talks about the character you're playing as having a brother, and there is basically no other evidence I have found of this brother existing. I don't think he's made up, but some kind of weirdness happened there, for sure. And I'm assuming he is going to be the antagonist that shows up too. But yeah, there's entire things still in Blueprints that I don't understand. There's a lot of things that felt like I was going to have to understand a lot more and read a lot more books and get backstory, and really it's more just getting to the right place. Oh, apparently there's a rumor now that Assassin's Creed 1 might be getting remade too, or at least it's being considered to be remade by Ubisoft, is the rumor. But yeah, there are also things that I just don't think I have the one thing that's needed to actually solve the puzzle. The game is relatively easy, but I will say there is a gallery that probably only unlocks when you get to room 46. I suspect there are several rooms that really only unlock when you get to room 46, or you get to the drafting room and you add rooms that way, which could make a late game grind be necessary, in that you are gonna have to just get the drafting room over and over again. But the gallery in particular has 4 pictures that are drawn by the creator of the book, the Maze book, the book called Maze, who inspired the creation of blueprints, pretty obviously. But I think that's probably all. I think his name is Christopher Mason. It's probably a pen name too. But in the gallery, you have these 4 pictures, and next to the pictures, you're supposed to spell out words. I cheated in that. I spent a good 30-40 minutes trying to figure out how the pictures would lead me to a word to spell out. And while I was able to get 1 out of 4 of them right, the other 3 make no sense, and the 4th most difficult word would have not been a word I would have ever thought of. It's just like way too long of a word. It's like a countdown style 9-letter word that my vocabulary wouldn't just immediately jump to as far as super long words. I mean, I speak quite a few more obscure, like college level type words, I'm sure, than most, but even then, the word they had there is not one I would use in normal conversation. And when finishing the gallery, you're then able to get to another room that is like a 3D representation of that last picture, which also kind of feels out of place. And it gives a real good contrast to the simplicity that most of the rooms, all the other rooms in blueprints have. And really, as far as I can tell, there's probably at least 2 puzzles in every room. Maybe some rooms don't have any puzzles at all, but I would say on an average room probably has 2 puzzles in it, and it still is very empty, and it's just not full of a bunch of random visual red herring items. Whereas the Maze book, every single picture representing a room was just overflowing with red herring visual items. So in the decade since the Maze book came out, the developer of Blueprints, I think, really simplified it. There is a secondary puzzle mechanic in Blueprints, which are these, I think they're called Morajai boxes, where they are light puzzles in a 3x3 grid, and they're different colors, and clicking on them moves the colors in different ways to try and get certain colors in certain corners, depending on the variation of the Morajai boxes, to unlock the box. And inside the boxes almost always is an allowance token that increases the amount of gold you start with each day by 2. And just doing that has gotten me up to 15 so far. Probably going to get closer to like 20 gold every day, which is extremely helpful. But you won't also run into the Morajai boxes until past room 46. There's also a weirdness with room 46 in that when you enter it the first time, that is when it goes to credits and just tells you you've beaten the game effectively. And I imagine you could see even 30% of players saying, alright, I beat that, I don't want to go any further and find out the extra secrets. And you could probably do it very early in the game, considering there's an achievement for getting to room 46 on day 1. I don't know how you would have really gotten to room 46 on day 1. That seems a little crazy, but there is very possibly a cheat that I will find that could have that happen. There's also an achievement for getting to room 46 in less than an hour. So, yeah. Those 2 achievements alone might also break me of any need or impulse to try to get all the achievements in Blueprints. But yeah, the second time the next day, when you just are allowed to keep playing and are then also not under any real threat that you have to solve it before day 45. I'm only at like day 21 right now. You can go back into room 46 and there is actually a room there and actually things you need to see in that room to continue to find and discover things. There is a uncertainty certainly with blueprints right now, in that I think I could either take forever, and the odds are probably higher it will take forever to figure out all the things I want to figure out, but there is also a possibility where everything just falls into place and I get really lucky and then entire major quests and questions get answered, which, yeah, if that happens, at some point I'm gonna have to just look up all the secrets to make sure I've found everything, if I think I've found everything. Yeah, increasingly at the end of yesterday I was just more and more willing to cheat the more Jai boxes, for instance, just because they really suck as a secondary gameplay mechanic, and you can kind of tell that early in development those were going to be a big puzzle mechanic that you were going to see a lot of, and they found that the estate building gameplay mechanic of placing rooms was just a much better experience, simpler experience, and more varied experience than looking at a single screen with light puzzles and clicking buttons. Yeah, the main gameplay mechanic of blueprints is really complicated compared to the more Jai boxes, and they really stand out as just bad puzzles. Inherently, while there are different versions of the puzzles, there's only 4 puzzle rooms in blueprints where you are just directly given puzzles to solve in that specific room. And that is the parlor, the billiard room, the gallery, which if you solve it once, you've solved it permanently, and room 8, which probably is a one-time solve too. And I don't think the puzzles actually get any harder based on how high up you put those rooms. And I don't see a real reason why you'd want the puzzles to get harder. Maybe the 8th year classroom also has a kind of like marathon challenge, final exam thing. There's an achievement around that too, so that would be a puzzle. But then all the other rooms, you go in the room, you maybe dig some dig spots, you maybe open some chests if they're there, you look around, and then you go to the next room. Each room may have most rooms have some kind of some trick or puzzle to them, or at least a lot of them do, not all of them, that is unique to that room. But in the first few runs, you're just going to walk through the room and assume that there is nothing going on at all. So the biggest thing as far as blueprints that is going to cause me trouble now is just getting locked into long runs and playing for too long. I was fairly lucky to be able to beat the end run yesterday in the middle of today's morning and exit out of the app and then be able to launch Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel for the background music today and for the video playback when I take a bathroom break, which is going to happen, I think, in a matter of moments. I think technically a moment is supposed to be somewhere like 10 or 20 seconds, or some odd number of seconds. I don't think a moment is 2 minutes, but there is an old-fashioned technical amount as far as moments. Of course, nobody really means that when they say moment. I don't know if there's anything else I really even can say about Blueprints. There's still things that I think should lead to something, but I'm not figuring it out, and so they aren't really leading to something in a couple places. And then there's one thing in particular that is just stuck until I find a special room. I've almost found all the rooms in the game, but there's still, I think, a few special rooms that have to do it. And then I don't know how many of the special keys I've actually seen, and I don't know for certain how many special keys actually exist, although I suspect it is 8, because 8 seems to be the number for everything in Blueprints. And then the only other thing I'm watching is Danmachi, or in English it's How to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon. This latest season really once again fell into just them having a war game, and it just fell into an all-out battle, which, yeah, they're not really going into the dungeon at all, and the story seems like in this episode fairly rushed to just have a battle section. There is something funny about how chaste that show is while still trying to also be lewd. It's almost certainly like a evening anime in Japan, so it's not going like late night where it would actually show nudity, but it is definitely going with a lot of battle damage of characters, where it's really just not even connected particularly well. So they're in the middle of this deadly battle and screaming about how they hate each other, and then characters get blasted with magical energy and their clothes are torn to the point where they're wearing a really skimpy two-piece bikini from a fully clothed outfit that would have covered almost all of their skin for the female characters. And a lot of the female warrior characters are kind of in skimpy clothing. But yeah, the fan service in the animation really doesn't connect to the story at all, as the main character Belle is obviously in love with only one character, despite other people saying they're in love with him, and he would not even act on his love for that one character. So like it's almost a joke series that would make more sense if it was taken further into a joke series, where it was just like all these female characters throw themselves at him and he is just constantly having to run away from them, and he kind of is doing that, but then they also throw in the whole fantasy fighting section, which doesn't really add anything to the show. And really, I wish it was more just that kind of show where they were going deeper in the dungeon and giving a generic fantasy fighting show. But a lot of it, maybe also the English dub is problematic in that it's just not dubbed particularly well. I wouldn't be surprised if it's way better in Japanese. Anyways, I am early today, but I'm going to take a bathroom break and pause, and I'll be back in a few minutes. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. Yeah, I've tried a new breakfast that was more sausage and greasiness and cheese, and yeah, changing my diet even a little bit only makes it worse. Um, and yeah, they're not even really good in breakfast sandwiches. It's just all designed to be microwaved and designed to be as flavorless as possible. It really tastes almost nothing like the eggs taste nothing at all. Like they don't taste like eggs, like fresh eggs would taste. Which fresh eggs, even slightly fresh eggs, compared to factory ultra processed eggs, are gonna taste way better. Things you can get in the grocery store are gonna taste way better as far as calling those fresh eggs, and certainly eggs that you're getting right out of the chicken from a few days ago or even that morning are going to taste even better, from what I hear at least. Cheese is American cheese nonsense. Not really cheese at all. Tastes nothing. The bread is probably way too much sugar in the bread and croissant rolls, and not fresh bread, it's frozen bread, so again, freshness would drastically change the flavor there. And the sausage is, I'm sure, as low quality sausage as you could get, while it's still being acceptable. And generally, I think, like, particularly for breakfast sausages, they're always too greasy, and that the right way to potentially make a breakfast sausage is to cook a lot of that fat and grease out of it, and possibly even pat it down with like a paper towel just to absorb as much grease as possible. And it yeah, I don't know if there's anything else for me to talk about here. So we were just in the warm-up here, and I really don't have too much other to say. There was a game. I'll strive to find it on Steam and show it. Which, it's a funny coincidence because I had talked about the idea of making a game, of a developer particularly, making a game that would just be like a roulette wheel of your Steam backlog, games you own but haven't played or put a lot of time into, and then the roulette wheel would spin and say, here, play this game, just to gamify the idea of playing something new. And I wondered if that was actually possible through the Steam API to just pull somebody's account and know what games they have. And somebody made something very similar to that, or is in the process of developing something very similar. It's slightly different because it's not a roulette wheel. It is a 3D running around game where you're being attacked by little floppy disks that have the images of the games from your backlogs, and they do more damage based on what the maximum price of that game, I think, is. I don't think they can really tell what you personally paid for a game, whether it was on sale or not. So yeah, the API interface concept apparently is doable, unless we find out that game actually can't be on Steam, and that is a different thing. We have a new month now, so I think we do, at least March, February, March. Yeah, nope, March, April. Had to. I did an experiment last night, and I ran the news at like 3 or 4 in the morning, so there might be some news stories that we miss that will show up on Monday. That probably wouldn't be a big problem, but it did seem like that might be a smart way to do things going further, is like as I'm going to sleep before a streaming day, just let the macro run then, instead of what I have been doing, which is waking up in the morning sometimes and letting the macro run, and then sometimes going back to sleep and then streaming in the afternoon. That was very inconsistent, and wrought with risk. Yeah, even though Pokemon TCG Pocket now has a new expansion, I guess last month was probably a little slow and boring in general, so you can see $5 million less dollars estimated was earned for Pokemon TCG Pocket. I'm still playing it and doing the new content, but yeah, there isn't anything super interesting there. It does feel like to me that the expansion cards that and the expansion packs that they are coming out with in that game are up to date at this point. So I don't know if there's ever going to be any attempt to go to past expansions in the real world card game and have that be reintroduced into it to get like older cards. I'm not sure that there really even are older cards, but I suspect there are. Right now it still kind of feels like the card game really centers around closer to maybe 80 Pokemon out of what potentially could be like 900 different Pokemon. And maybe they just always do keep it somewhat simple. Still playing Memento Mori. It is staying at an estimated same amount of 3 million a month. And we see a Dragon Quest game is new. A couple new games. But yeah, the amount of spending overall seems to be down by all the red. And that seems to be the trend with just due to the economy and just the way gacha games have been going. And even if you are making money, you're probably making less because there's still a fairly large amount of competition that is growing. Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel is down. Yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, I imagine, wouldn't shut its doors without announcing something new, but they could very abruptly announce something new and get rid of Master Duel. Although I don't know why you would want to do that. That would be a huge rug pull for people who played Master Duel to lose tens of thousands of cards, and probably a lot of people putting money, a decent amount of money in it. Madoka Magica is back up. But I'm not playing that. Yeah. We also have a story that may not be talked about, but allegedly, according to the husband of some kind of VTuber celebrity, they went to the UK and were seemingly quickly arrested for having made chibi animated art, lolly art maybe, something that must have been a little bit lewd enough that she would have been arrested. So this was like hand-drawn anime lollies, anime girl type art, maybe anime boy type art anyways, that they made themselves, their own creative expression, that unless there's more evidence to say it was sourced by some real person, would be completely sourced from their imagination and thus effectively victimless. I don't buy into the argument that society as a whole is victimized by an artist creating lowly art or lowly porn even. But yeah, the UK has been increasingly pushing censorship and control and moving towards a overly controlling fascist state. They've been doing it in a very different way, in a very slow way, and for very different reasons than other countries have been. But yeah, we know Ireland also has implemented these kinds of laws, and we really have no idea where the line is. And in the UK in particular, it often is the case that somebody gets arrested and has to go to trial just to prove that the laws are ridiculous. And that's not unique to the UK, really. And yeah, in some countries, if you get charged, you're immediately going to be found guilty, regardless of how ridiculous the law is. Yeah. But yeah, the art in question, from what I'm hearing, was drawn in 2011, far before probably the law was in place. So this might very well be the case that in some old folder on her phone that they probably searched at a border or something, that art was being kept. Or it may straight up be that she posted the art in 2011. So yeah, censorship is increasing, particularly when it comes to the anime style, or anything that is created solely from the mind of an artist. Now, there is an argument that maybe AI art is sampling pictures of human children to make AI art, but even in that case, I don't know how much of that would be recognizable to the point where you could call it anything more than just a collage of potentially hundreds, if not thousands, of pictures of children, appropriate pictures of children, one would hope, then being collaged into creating an AI child. So again, it feels very victimless even in my mind for AI. AI is victimizing artists in other ways. And then, of course, if anybody has any real pictures of children, just that obviously is illegal because there is a real victim there, and I agree with that. Although, even in that case, a lot of those pictures would have been completely harmless pictures from hundreds of years ago or decades ago that would have been pretty norm. I definitely know that my parents had pictures of their kids. I don't think me, but some of my brothers. They had like one picture and of them getting out of the bathtub, and they eventually just threw away those pictures, and they said, yeah, that's probably not, we took that innocently and we weren't doing anything with it, but it's probably not one to keep for the photo albums. But yeah, it was pretty common in like my parents and most people's grandparents era for there to be like nude swimming in the pond, and somebody might be taking a picture there. And pools used to mandate nude swimming because the pool filters would clog up if you were wearing any clothes. The cotton of the time would clog up the pool filters. I am kind of glad that the group showering in schools is almost certainly all gone at this point. That was drug out way too much for gym classes. I'm kind of rambling here, but yeah, censorship is increasing, and particularly for my focus as far as a video game critic and a fan of video games and a fan of just art in general, anything that is artistically created from the minds of somebody should not be censored. And I've never heard a good argument for anything to be censored of any form factor. So I'm still not really going to do anything with the hardware review. It seems like maybe the hardware review hasn't even updated here, like, or at least very little has changed here. There's a 0% change according to this on everything, so that makes me think this is probably broken as far as stats go. But yeah, that now is not really the time to be talking about hardware with everything being so expensive. So yeah, still playing Blueprints. I think looking at the achievements now, I've seen them all. The game in-game tells you what the trophies are, and the trophies are directly connected to the achievements, or at least I think most of them are. So they want you to know what you need to do, and in that there is going to be some achievements that might be really, really hard. It says in the last 2 weeks I have played 97 hours of Blueprints, and while it feels like that might be somewhat accurate, I know for reality it is not anywhere close to that. Yeah, I would say I am at somewhere around episode 36, so really closer to like 35 episodes. Let's see. I'm gonna just type in the name of that game. See, it's called Game Quest, and then it's called The Backlog. Battler, and we'll just type in all of that. That 3 keywords. So yeah. Again, this is not exactly what I was proposing. The idea of running around fighting in an arena, your backlog could have been one of many mini games that you might have created as an additional DLC for what I was suggesting. But what I was suggesting is a developer would be developing a much bigger game, and then they would make mini games, and if as they're trying to find mini games and refine how you would make mini games and find ones that are super fun for your main game, any mini game like a roulette wheel or hangman or dice rolling or maybe tic-tac-toe, simple like basic board game type stuff with a backlog twist, and then each of those games would certainly be streamer bait type games, and this clearly is streamer bait. You can see that this is not very polished, and it's not even in early access right now, so for all we know it may not actually work. You may be seeing a simulation here of what they want to do without actually testing if they could do it. But yeah, I think the API might be able to tell you that stuff. Inherently, I don't think a game like this in this form factor is really encouraging you to go and play your backlog of games too much. It's just kind of reminding you what they are. It is an interesting twist to make them floppy disks, but then attacking with a keyboard as your weapon seems to take up way too much of the visual space, and you can see the animation here is pretty bad, and the user interface here is pretty bad. Not that my idea was going to be much better as far as the level of polish, because the idea would be to sell mini games for like 69 cents and not put a ton of polish into them. And then whenever you thought of a new mini game, you just add it as your developer thing. I don't think there is really a guaranteed way that you could launch other programs from your game. Yeah, I don't think there's a way to do that. So, I mean, it would probably be a pretty big security hole if games on Steam could launch other games or other apps. You could probably launch web pages that would be deep links, Steam links, to the Steam client to be able to go from this game to the game in the backlog. But then also you have to have your application exit out before you could launch another game on Steam. And this is the kind of thing that really Valve, with their infinite money, should create something themselves like that and just integrate it into the website of Steam instead of it being an actual application. Here we can see English and Russian languages, which is always a red flag, in that this might very well just be a low effort game or a scam game. Like, I have no evidence of that for sure, but what this also coincidentally shows us too is a better way than the other game, which was a cozy room decorating game designed to show the games you have in your Steam catalog. In that case, they were treating them more like VHS tapes on the shelf, where there's not really going to be any spine art to show the game. So yeah, if you were trying to make an application, a game that would highlight your favorite games in your Steam library, while you don't need the floppy disk aspect and you don't need the time and the price, the flat square face showing the banner art is much better of a way to make a collage, make a matrix of game images. At a certain point though, it might very well just be that you're going to make a slideshow of all your games. Even that though, as an application, wouldn't be terrible, to automatically pull the banner art of all the games you own and make a slideshow for it. That too is another bit of DLC on the idea of what I think you could do there, in that you could just have the application running as a screensaver showing what games you have on the screen. But yeah, the concept is intriguing that we can even get that far. But also there is a level of dauntingness here that would also piss off a lot of people to the point where they wouldn't really ever engage with this or buy it, in that a lot of people don't want to be told or reminded how much money they have effectively flushed down the toilet, or how little time they've actually spent on games they own. And for a lot of people, if you have like 2 or 3 hours in a game and then you stop playing it, it's just because you are not the type of player who wants to continue playing the game all the way through. Plenty of gamers, unfortunately, do not make it to the credits of games and do not play most games all the way through. And I don't know how we correct that problem, but I definitely think it's a problem when you have 60% of all players not making it to the credits of every single game on average. That is an issue. That is that ADHD gamer style where you are getting drug around to play with your friends. I think a lot of it may have to do with people not really having time to, and games being too long. But yeah, I don't know if there really are any solutions I can even suggest there, but it definitely sucks and is something that needs to be addressed. That's one of the things I like about Blueprints in particular, is even though on the face of it, it probably is a really, really difficult puzzle game, you are able to get to room 46 if you get lucky and ignore a lot of puzzles and just aren't even that good at puzzles. And the game kind of tells you the answers to puzzles if you just keep on playing. Whereas in The Witness, if you couldn't figure out the mechanics of the puzzles, you were just screwed. you would not make it to the credits in the witness. Talos Principle, kind of the same thing. If you didn't figure out the mechanics, you would be screwed at a certain point. The other puzzle game, I never remember. Isles of Illusion, I believe, was the name of the game. That one, I think, is a particularly bad example of where you're just screwed if you can't figure out the gameplay mechanics, or just don't want to do a ton of puzzles. Yeah. The infinite styling, or the near infinite feel of Isles of Illusion was overwhelming to even me. It's just like way too much. And the puzzle's way too small for their own good, and way too random for their own good. But it's not just puzzle games. 60% of gamers is the statistic of all types of games don't make it to credits. And that doesn't make a huge amount of sense for like single player experiences. Everybody should make it to the credits of a single player experience that's focused around the story. But I think even back in the day, as we're seeing The Walking Dead here, even in back of the day with The Walking Dead games where there was no way to really die and not make progress in the game, people weren't making it to the end of like season 3 or season 4 of Walking Dead. Of course, part of that problem too is the DLC nature and the episodic releases coming out for the Telltale games. Like, if they didn't make it episodic, and if there wasn't big points in which people had to wait from one episode to another, I think a lot more people would have made it to the end in the credits. Of course, that's not going to be a problem now. Now it's just a problem of the yeah, you can see this says game's initial cost, not how much you spent on it. So the numbers are going to be wildly different based on how much you got games on sale, and most people get things on sale, so the initial cost number is pretty useless there. Very few people would have bought it. Yeah. Anyways, I was saying the problem with Telltale games now is that they're all out there and may be available. Some, I think a lot of them aren't actually even available for purchase, but their servers are shut down and their relevancy is terribly low. There's no reason to play even the Walking Dead ones. Moving on. Heroes of the Olden Era, we'll look at that, is in early access on the main front page of Steam. Otherwise, I feel like there's not going to be too much different. I haven't watched a ton of Steam controller reviews. I should, but I just haven't gotten around to doing blueprints. A ton of people still talking about Pragmata. They either are doing a really good job of viral marketing, or if they've just found how to pull at the heartstrings of people. That being said, any success on something like Twitter or any social media these days may be much easier because there's just less people actually engaging and competing on those platforms. I did see a funny animation of Diana from Pragmata licking a Nintendo Switch cartridge which has the bitterant on it, so babies won't swallow it. I question though why they don't just put a hole in the middle of the cartridges at that point. It would be fairly easy, I would think. It might even help on the structuralness of it. But yeah, if you put a hole in the middle of things and somebody swallows it, they won't choke on it. Although I imagine a Switch cartridge, you wouldn't choke. You might choke on it, but you wouldn't like have trouble breathing from something that small. Batteries are the things that kids used to swallow, or at least people talked about kids occasionally swallowing them. Again, I wonder if maybe batteries should just have a hole in it. It's the reason why pin caps have holes in the tops of them, is that they are, in case you get them in your throat, it won't block your airway, is the worry. I don't know how accurate, how necessary it is to worry about that. Speaking of pins, excuse me, sorry. Yeah. In the old days, and even now, I imagine it, greasy truck stops, you can get, they had these pins called tip and strip pins, is one of the brands. Basically, it's a stripper person. You hold the pin upside down and the clothing floats away, revealing some minimal amount of, well, nudity, but not really going to show too much. And yeah, that was a old memory for old people before the internet and porn was just freely available. And so I heard them talk about that on Taskmaster in the latest episode, and I decided to look and see if you could have custom ones of those, or if there had been any like major variants of those made. And no, not really. They are probably gimmick pins that are not things that are going to sell. Onirism is an unfortunate name. Because if you take out one I and R, you have Oniism, which is a phrase that maybe was used by the Japanese back in the day, but it's just a different way of saying masturbation. I don't think it's used nowadays, but yeah, it definitely was a phrase that was used a lot back in the old days, 2 or 3 decades ago. Yeah, maybe 1 decade ago. Koei Tecmo bundle here not loading up correctly. Yeah, increasingly it's getting hard for me to justify buying any more games myself, but also when looking at the collections I have, my Steam collection is just one of many collections I have of things that I probably won't be able to fully enjoy before I die, and whenever that is. As I get older, it is increasingly more of a desire to find the appropriate heir, which is very much the theme of Blueprints, is that you're solving these puzzles to prove you're the appropriate heir to become the owner of the estate. But yeah, my thoughts do definitely turn to the thought of finding an appropriate heir to inherit my movie collection, which I got Total Recall for 4K UHD version for like $13. Generally, I wouldn't have bought the game, the movie, if it wasn't like $13 and 4K. But it is fairly questionable whether you need Total Recall. Total Recall. This is the how Arnold Schwarzenegger Total Recall, not the newer remake. Yeah, that's really pushing it. I really wasn't expecting at some point that I would get like Arnold Schwarzenegger things. I could see Terminator 2 in 4K UHD. I could even see the Conan movies if there really is any upgrades there. But yeah, I don't think I'd get like Kindergarten Cop or Jingle All the Way or Twins in 4K. Those are fairly well prominent movies that you will be able to see, and visually they're just not going to be pushing the visuals too much. Terminator 2 pushes the visuals, Twins not so much. Yeah, Fatal Frame Project Zero, if I was going to rush to play that, this being on sale for 20% would make some sense. Just getting the Atelier games, if at some decent discount, kind of makes some sense. But yeah, the latest Atelier game, Atelier Yuma, is mixed reviewed. So really it is only the Atelier Ryzen games that I think you would go for. I don't think I would really get the Romance of the Three Kingdoms games. Yeah, I don't think I'd get Fairy Tale. I haven't seen anybody really talk about Fairy Tale in a really long time, if ever. I can't really remember anything. And like Monster Rancher 1 and 2 DX would be a nostalgia play for a game that I'm not actually nostalgic for. Silent Hill F. It's not really something I think I need to play. Here's a Might and Magic, the olden era. If I had a ton of free time, I might jump into that like day one, but I'm going to wait at least until it comes out of early access. But yeah, I am more leaning towards, if I am going to buy a game, it is going to be because I personally want to play it, and probably I want to play it right now instead of just getting things on sale. But also, I have to very much manage my time. And with playing Blueprints right now, I don't think there really is a good system to be had where I could go back to like Resident Evil 2 Remake and play that for a little bit and then play Blueprints. I think the second I get away from Blueprints, I'm going to start forgetting so much stuff that's in my mind that I'll never get back to it. So I kind of have to stick to it until the end, and what it's going to be is a race between me personally figuring stuff out and me getting frustrated enough to use the internet to tell me the solutions. Which, yeah, there will just be a line in the sand where I'll say, I don't know what else there is to do here. I just need to type in Blueprints secrets and look at a list of all the secrets that are in the game or that have been discovered in the game. There is still a feeling that there might be stuff that is just not found at all in the game. We can see the Steam Deck refurbs are still out of stock. We did hear someone in an interview from Valve talk about how they're working on the Steam Deck 2 and how they're looking for a significant improvement in the Steam Deck 2. They don't want it just to be an incremental thing, is what they said in the past. Maybe now, with the cost of hardware and RAM and stuff, they might be more willing to do an incremental improvement, particularly if it just becomes very difficult for them to get parts that they would have used otherwise. But yeah, the other part of that is that they are definitely thinking that they want to iterate from the Steam Deck to the Steam controller. They want the Steam controller to iterate in some way to the Steam machine, and then they want the Steam machine to iterate in some way back to a Steam Deck 2. So they see it very much as a linear progression and not multiple product lines that are being developed in parallel. Which we have certainly seen products like that in the past where things are developed in parallel and you'll have one aspect or one element in one thing that's better than the other things, and there is never really a great product that has all the good stuff in it, or if there is a great product that has all the good elements in it, it is way more expensive. Cell phones in particular are what I'm thinking about there, in that you have Samsung cell phone lines that have like these budget phones that have chips from several years ago, or slower RAM, or not expandable memory, or sometimes the cheaper phones have expandable memory slots, and then the more expensive ones have built-in memory with no expansion capabilities. Yeah. People are still, I think, very happy with their Steam Decks and their experience as it is right now, so yeah. I don't think there is an inherent need to make a Steam Deck 2 anytime soon. Next year, Christmas might be a good time to start talking about Steam Deck 2, if not release one, if the economics really support that. But it might very well be that even next year, Christmas is just going to be the first time that the Steam machine really is priced right or discounted enough to be worth buying. Yeah, increasingly, I know when I was in school, I just did not do any homework and had way more free time than I think even anyone would have imagined a child could have. And it is somewhat bumming me out with the realization that the way I paved through mostly threats and violence, for lack of a better way to describe it, is just not open to most people. And it is really a bummer to see how kids these days are just wasting their lives away in school. I mean, that's a mean way to phrase it, but yeah, the idea of spending 18 years in a school that is really just pumping your head with propaganda around working and capitalism, and a little bit of propaganda around patriotism and going to war for the upper, richer class, is something that's always been a bummer, but it's bumming me out even more these days. Because in contrast to that, I think I accomplished quite a bit in my first 18 years. Yeah, even knowing that I probably was accomplishing almost nothing in the first 10 years there. And at the very least, I accomplished things I wanted to accomplish. A ton of that was playing video games. But that's what I wanted to do. And that has led me to be way more informed and way more experienced, I think, than most as far as playing video games and having a voice and opinion to be a critic around video games, which also explains why so many content creators annoy me, in that they probably haven't played enough video games to have formed an opinion or having a voice around them. And when they talk about video games, they say absolutely nothing, or they are just generically breaking down what happens in the game without giving any opinions. Yeah. Particularly for my criticism of Blueprint, it's kind of hard to make criticism for a game that you are revealing the story in random orders compared to other players. But there definitely are some things I think probably should have been more focused on as far as the story, to make sure every player gets bits of that story. The allowance tokens, in particular, should have been told to you on day one in room one. Like the first 2 minutes of playing the game, you should have found an allowance token on the table and been handed that so that you know to look for those and that those are big rewards. The first allowance token I found was random and many days into the game, and it highlights an issue of blueprints in that you could very easily miss really important things and your experience would severely suffer. The apple orchid is another thing that if you unlock the apple orchid on day one, you're going to have a much better experience than if you never unlock the apple orchid as a permanent upgrade. And that does feel like that would be one of the few things that on a second playthrough would make the whole experience even better and even easier. But it wouldn't really help you with the achievements of getting to room 46 in less than an hour on day one. Alright, well, we're going to go through the Video Games Chronicle news now. Again, I ran the macro at like 3 or 4 in the morning, so there might be 1 or 2 stories that we missed, but whatever. Resident Evil Requiem players mostly chose third-person gameplay with Leon, but were less decisive with Grace. PC players also tended to prefer first-person according to the game director. It is interesting, certainly, how these kinds of metrics get sent back from games and people aren't perhaps informed well enough that metrics are being sent back. But yeah, pretty much any big AAA game has a whole bunch of telemetry and metrics being sent back to the developers, and it is questionable how useful any of that telemetry really is. It probably helps them focus on which bugs to fix and what settings to focus more on, but it's not like games are significantly better year over year because they're getting telemetry from this. And in the case of Resident Evil Requiem, if it was third person for all of the time, always, people probably wouldn't have complained. People might have complained if it was first person always. But then it also, with the Resident Evil engine, I imagine it is trivial to change it from third person to first person because you already have the models there anyways, and they're rendering at some level of detail even in first person, just for lighting and reflected light reasons. There is also a trailer that was put out for a Resident Evil movie from the person who made Barbarian and Weapons. And yeah, it seems like it is taking place in the outskirts of Raccoon City during the initial breakout. It feels a lot like Resident Evil 7 as far as what the trailer shows, and what you actually are shown there is a character who is getting guns and searching drawers for items and looking for keys and things like that. They are taking the essence of playing a Resident Evil game, it feels like, and making it a movie, whereas previous Resident Evil movies and the Netflix TV show seem to be more about spectacle and action and really usually a high level of cheese. This trailer feels like it is inspired by Resident Evil 7 and the stories and the storytelling style of Resident Evil 7, not Resident Evil 4 and Wesker nonsense. And yeah, so it also feels like a real horror movie. That being said, I will also say I didn't really like Barbarian, and the descriptions I've seen of other people describing weapons doesn't make it feel like a particularly interesting movie either. So there's a lot of room for artsy-fartsiness in the Resident Evil movie that might hurt it. But yeah, we'll see. Even if this new Resident Evil movie was mediocre, it still would be probably a step in the right direction and better than the previous Resident Evil movies. But it might also be an example of where Capcom is just too willing to license out the Resident Evil franchise name to any streaming service or movie making company. Which they need to be careful with oversaturation. I mean, they can make banger hit after banger hit of games if they're slow enough, but they've also put a ton of money and failed at trying to make Resident Evil an online experience, and they've played on a lot of their trump cards by remaking old Resident Evil games, of which there is not that many left. I'd assume this chapter here, this whole article, might be spoilers for Resident Evil Requiem, and I'm still trying to keep myself mostly spoiler free from that. Oddly, the Pragmata hype online is, I think, also spoiling some things from Resident Evil Requiem. Yeah. And yeah, remember the DLC is coming out for Resident Evil Requiem, and the director is suggesting everybody finish the game before the DLC comes out. So almost certainly it's going to be a story continuation, bit of content that will spoil some part of the story. If we were to try and contrast the reception of Pragmata versus the reception of Resident Evil, both games I think were received very well, but it is interesting how the general discussion, maybe the viral marketing, maybe just mainstream video game critics repeating ideas other people had already said, but that general conversation seemed to center around how scary half of Resident Evil Requiem was, and that the game was too scary, or almost too scary, whereas the viral marketing or general conversation around Pragmata is all about Diana, which I think that works way better for Pragmata overall. Although it's still, I think if somebody logically takes a step back and thinks about Pragmata and looks at the conversation, the message that I'm definitely getting is Diana as a character is very cute and you may fall in love with her, but there is nothing of interest to say as far as the actual gameplay or any other element in the game. So maybe I'd want to play Pragmata, but I probably would want to play it on easy and just rush through it for the story. Where Resident Evil Requiem, maybe I would want to play it on normal difficulty and then even ramp it up to a harder difficulty, as it is, I imagine, more of an action game, at least in the Leon segments. Subnautica 2 early access starts in May in the wake of its publisher and All-Fired Leads legal dispute. Crafton was ordered to reinstate the game's fired leadership team. This is a huge mess, and it will be, I guess, a good example of will the legal system actually be able to undo and correct for such a mess. Yeah. I mean, I feel like this lawsuit is just going to keep, or lawsuits like it are just going to keep coming up. And as a consumer, I just don't know if it is worth dipping your toe into Subnautica 2. I don't know if it's worth buying Subnautica 1 or playing that even now, because they've effectively muddied the water. This is This is probably the best example of political mudslinging at working in the video game industry, is just by muddying the water and embrawling an entire company into lawsuits and having a publishing company have this attempt at firing its leadership team for one reason or another. And I don't know which side, if either side is the good guys, or on which side, if either side is the bad guy. And I don't think it matters, because inherently this level of extra conflict, extra strife in any job is almost certainly going to lead to a worser product being made. Like, this is not pressure creating diamonds mentality. That's not how jobs really work. In fact, that phrase is almost exclusively used as a scapegoat excuse to have a hostile work environment, and that's really what this is. I mean, this is the epitome of a hostile work environment for everybody. Yeah, this is a nice cinematic trailer that we're seeing for Subnautica 2, but it's really not showing any actual gameplay. Maybe this trailer is going to hint at you actually being able to walk on the surface at some level. I also would have to ask the general question about, was Subnautica ever actually a game worth playing, or was it just a streamer bait game and thus it got more attention than it really deserved, the first game? And I don't really know the answer. Moving on, Japanese physical charts say Tomodachi Life holds on to top spot as Pokemon Pokepia nears 1 million physical games. Switch 2 version of Pragmata is a new entry arriving in Japan a week after other versions. This is, I assume, Tomodachi Life, with a character designed to look a little bit like Mario. This is Video Games Chronicle talking about the charts, though, and so their chart system is pretty terrible, and they only talk about the charts inconsistently compared to Gamatsu. They don't do it every week. Maybe Video Games Chronicle is going to start doing it every week, though, at which point I would just ignore it. Nacon has rescheduled its postponed game showcase despite fears over its future. The publisher filed for insolvency in late February. This may very well be a case where Nacon as a company has to pay out some kind of penalty if they full-on cancel their show, as far as reserving a convention center or something, because I definitely have heard of people doing that before. Companies doing that, where they'll just reschedule the show and push it further to try to avoid paying any penalties as they're going through bankruptcy, and they won't fully ever cancel the show. And it seems like even musicians do those kinds of shenanigans where they don't want to actually perform, and they have a contract with a convention center or something, and they'll cancel the show in spirit while calling it a rescheduling or something else. Yeah, it seems like actually quite a few fairly well-known musicians do that fairly often, where they're just canceling shows. Which, at a certain level, you're flying in planes all over the place. You're going to be jet lagged. You're drinking and doing drugs more than likely, way more than the average person. It's surprising musicians make it on stage as much as they do. Yeah. But yeah, that's not a good experience for the fans of anything though when a show is canceled / rescheduled into infinity. I have to say, Nacon going bankrupt really did kind of come out of nowhere in my mind, but I guess that's how it probably always happens. Is a company feels like it's doing as well as all the other companies, it comes out with a new game, the new game tends to follow, fail, and shut down, and then the revelation comes that they're totally out of money and they're bankrupt because they had put everything into that latest game. And yeah, that just seems to be why you don't hear stories of companies struggling for years upon years upon years. The only company that I kind of argue has been struggling for years is Ubisoft. But Ubisoft is probably not really financially struggling as much as they are just trying to shutter themselves and skirt the labor laws in France. Let's see. One fateful, horrifying night. Here's the first trailer for the Resident Evil movie. The RE movie will feature an original story directed by Zach Krieger, who made Weapons and Barbarian. Yep. I feel like there is a pretty decent thought, too, of it just being an original movie instead of trying to have characters who are the superhero archetypes in the story. Like the fact that you have like Leon and Wesker in the terrible previous Resident Evil movies. I think Leon shows up, although maybe not. Like, but yeah, you have this dark yellow hued grittiness. So yeah, I really would like to play a trailer here, but that almost certainly would get a content ID, even though trailers are not copyrightable. But I'd say check out the trailer and you definitely get the feeling that this could have just been a generic horror movie, not called Resident Evil. It benefits a little bit with name recognition by calling it Resident Evil. It probably highlights how Sony still has a little bit of gusto, and that the Sony Pictures division that makes movies still has connections through Sony Interactive Entertainment to Capcom, so that they would do business with them and make a Resident Evil movie. There might be a very interesting contrast when this movie comes out to watch it and think about it as a movie versus it as a movie based off of a video game, because a lot of the elements in the trailer that are throwbacks to the idea of a video game are also kind of ridiculous and don't make sense in a movie way. Searching drawers for ammo, for instance, is something you would do a ton of in a video game, but in a movie you expect somebody to do it once or twice before it would just get repetitive and annoying. And movies are much shorter experiences, so you are going to have a much shorter experience in a movie than what a video game experience would be. Resident Evil in particular is known for usually having 3 acts with 3 very distinctive locations that are crazy different from each other. Whereas a Resident Evil movie might make a lot more sense if it is 2 acts or 3 much smaller acts that are all in very similar locations. Like it seems like he's in a farmhouse kind of the start in the countryside, and it makes it into Raccoon City, so that would be 2 locations, and then there's a scene where he's in the sewers, so that would be a 3rd location. But those are all fairly believable to be next to each other and connected. if he ends up in the hive, for instance, the umbrella lab under Raccoon City, or some umbrella lab somewhere, that'd be fairly different. Moving on, Star Wars Galactic Racer confirms a release date in a $160 physical collector's edition. Today is May 1st, a couple days away from May the 4th, which May the 4th be with you. Star Wars sales seem like they might be happening this year more. But yeah, it's going to be like Lego Star Wars sets, I think, are on sale already. And I don't know if there's any Lego Star Wars sets that are that interesting, and I'm not really that interested myself. And honestly, I don't think I really should be buying any more Lego at all. I have way too much of a backlog there, and am not spending any time trying to get those sets done. Let's see. Yeah, we might see some Star Wars games go on sale though on Steam. There's probably going to be some kind of little festival thing. Rebellion's British post-apocalyptic game Atomfall is being turned into a TV series. The show is being produced by Fleabag Studio, Two Brothers Pictures. Fleabag is a TV show. I don't know anything about it. I guess I watched the latest episode of The Boys. I think I already talked about it in the last stream. There's actually nothing to say about the latest episode anyway, so I won't go any further with that conversation. Yeah. Atomfall may be the Fallout in the UK that people actually are going to embrace versus the Fallout in the UK mod. But I think Atomfall also is going to be different, fairly different from a Fallout game, which is probably a good thing in itself. Because yeah, being more experimental and making some changes to the Fallout series would probably benefit that series. Fallout 4 was way too similar to Fallout 3. Speaking of radioactive things, in the real world, I saw a YouTube video talking about a radioactive synthetic carbon diamond battery that is being developed, which would potentially have a half-life of, I think, about 5,000 years, and is super energy dense. Of course, the problem with saying something is super energy dense and will have a half-life of 5,000 years, which means it would still be at half voltage after 5,000 years, and then it'd be at 25 voltage after about 10,000 years. The energy density has to basically be divided by the half-life of it, so the amount of power that you actually are getting from this battery is almost 0 volts. Like, it is infinitely small, and so unless you have a huge stack of these batteries all going at once, then you would not be able to power even the most power efficient circuitry. So really, the battery is mostly an experimental thing being designed for space exploration. Something where you could put maybe several of them in a stack in a satellite and then probe, and send the probe out into the universe for thousands of years and still get enough power to build up things. Yeah, but it's not even enough power right now to put in like medical devices. Not that you really would want a radioactive. It is shielded, but I mean, do you still really want a radioactive battery going on in a medical device in the body, like a pacemaker? They do have pacemaker batteries that I think last about 30 years or so. And then if you're still alive after 30 years on a pacemaker, they just change the battery, and the battery pack is further away from the heart, so it's not as big of a surgery. But yeah, we are far away from the idea of cell phones lasting that long, and in realistic terms, I don't know if other things like capacitors and resistors would even last thousands of years. Nobody really knows. So we would be much better with like 10-year batteries for cell phones that are really good, or 100-year batteries for devices that last one lifetime. The odds of somebody even wanting to keep the same device for that long is pretty low. Well, I liked a little bit of what I saw of Adam Fall there, but I also started talking, so I wasn't really paying enough attention to it. But yeah, I'll leave it at that. Clamshell handhelds based on the Commodore 64 and ZX Spectrum are coming later this year. I would assume there's going to be a limited number of games that you can have on this, and maybe you won't be able to upload your own games, so it might be built into it. Regardless, just from the price, $130, $150 is really, really expensive. Each handheld comes with 25 games built in. That is ridiculous. For $150, you could easily go with like a RetroPie setup and a whole bunch of ROMs to do hundreds upon hundreds of games. Maybe you'd pay a little bit more than $150 if you're buying really huge micro SD cards to hold the games. But also, I would say even that concept is kind of out the window if you can get a Steam Deck, because a Steam Deck can run retro games and hold as big of a micro SD card as you can put in it. Yeah, I tend to have a lot of medium-sized micro SD cards these days, and that I have nothing that I really want to do with them. And increasingly, if I am going to get a micro SD card, I'm looking for a 1.5 to 2 terabyte amount of space, which is a huge amount of space for an SD card. And that's just the scale of the projects that I would want to work on and the amount of space I'd want to have. Yeah, there's nothing particularly interesting about this list of games either. Yeah. This is one of the things where I suspect these are the last gasps of some of these companies making these handhelds, and they are just going to fall apart, and people are going to stop buying them enough that the companies are going to go out of business, and the business concept is just going to fall out of favor. Because, yeah, if these were $50 Temu type things that worked well enough, maybe then I would say consider it. But even then, probably not. Speaking of low quality products, which Temu is notorious for selling, yeah, you could very well have a terrible experience with the buttons, the quality of the buttons on this, and speakers, and just overall build. Here we have a quote from the new Xbox CEO, Asha Sharma. Quote, "We know we have work to do." This was the comment on the latest financials. Hardware revenue had declined by 30% last quarter, with overall Xbox box revenue declining by 5%, which I guess really speaks to a 25% increase in non-hardware revenue, which I guess you could make an argument means that going back and focusing on hardware is not the best plan to actually make money. But in the long term, I would argue it is almost certainly the right way to go, is to make sure Xbox as a console is a console, because the second Xbox as a console stops being something people want to own, then Game Pass is going to go out the window, and buying and playing Microsoft games in general are going to go out the window. Yeah, I don't think there's really a lot of system sellers on the horizon for Microsoft as far as their games go. Let's see. The release is almost here. As a quote, Plague Tale Studio suggests a third game, Resonance, is only months away. Resonance: A Plague Tale Legacy was announced nearly a year ago. Okay. I didn't even remember that it was announced. Yeah. The Plague Tale, apparently it's going to be a trilogy series of games, is another one I wanted to play and didn't get around to it, and I question if there's a big relevant reason why I would want to play it now, even with the third game coming out. The PlayStation apparently has finally explained its 30-day timer for digital games, says it is a one-time check. Players will not have to go online and verify their games every 30 days, Sony says. So, I think there was a whole bunch of rumor and speculation, and frankly, the more interesting thing around the PlayStation 5 in the past couple days is that they've figured out a way to run Linux on it through a exploit, hypervisor exploit, I believe is what it is. But yeah, it seems, to my understanding, is you have a online check that will trigger in the first 14 days, or no, I think it's actually after the first 14 days, to make sure that people aren't basically doing some kind of fraud of buying a game online with like stolen credit cards and then or charging back the charges on the credit cards, things like that. And then if that check after 14 days goes through, nothing happens. But if the check doesn't happen after 14 days, then there is between day 14 and day 30 a timer that would eventually expire and remove the license. This is probably also to stop people from just refunding the games and somehow keeping the game forever, in some kind of like, you downloaded the game and then you were able to make a backup of it, and then you refunded the game and then loaded the backup onto your console. So yeah, it doesn't sound particularly nefarious, and it feels very much like this is something that PlayStation should have already had a statement ready to go, instead of letting the rumors and speculation go for several days. This, I think, probably shows just bad leadership at Sony Interactive Entertainment, but the kind of bad leadership that any company could really do. Like, if you're going to implement anything, almost, it feels like you should just have your PR company have a statement ready to go. At the very least, they could have immediately responded with we will have more information for you later. It would have been very easy the second this popped up and a journalist emailed Sony for them to say, we have nothing to say at this time about that. Stay tuned, we'll have an announcement in a few days, or we'll get back to you with a response in a few days. And maybe they needed to even do that publicly on Twitter to say, hey, we'll talk more about this in the next few days, to just have a general explanation. But yeah, as an interesting thought, certainly, if you are running a big company, that every single action needs a press release comment on it in case that action is found out. This has nothing to do with video games, but I saw on Reddit apparently a JP Morgan high-level manager of some sort was forcing a lower-level employee to sleep with them, and it came out. So it's just like the most textbook sexual harassment. Frankly, I think you might call it rape. Sex by enticement might be a legal term there that I've ever heard as far as accusations being made. Of course, they're just accusations. But yeah, that is a thing too, that you would want a PR response to be able to say something very quickly. Although, in fairness, I have been looking at JP Morgan's stock, and it doesn't seem like it's really shifted the stock in any way. And inherently, I don't think shareholders probably care too much if even if it was the CEO was doing creepy stuff. Definitely doesn't seem like shareholders of WWE or fans of WWE really cared about creepy stuff that Vince McMahon was doing. And in Hollywood, movie directors, movie actors do all kinds of creepy stuff, and it doesn't really cause major backlash to the movies. I think we may have even talked about this story before. Nakon's collapse claims its first closure as the RPG studio confirms it no longer exists. Greedfall developer Spiders is shut down. May's PlayStation Plus essential free games include EA Sports FC 26. These do feel like things we had already talked about. Nakom's Japan only 1994 arcade game Cyber Commando is getting a home release for the first time. Yeah, and I think at this point we will skip any of the rumors of the 30-day game timers. Yeah, we talked about all the rest of these in the last stream, so I don't know why this is open, but I would suspect it has to do with sponsored content articles being added to their newsfeed. Yeah, we talked about all these other stories, so we'll skip all of this. And that will save us a ton of time. And it seems to me like the macro just went back really far. I think it's programmed to only go 3 pages back no matter what. So it doesn't go back forever. Alright, well that brings us to the Gematsu articles. Let's look at those. A 70s style robot anime called Geppy X adds a remastered versus original toggle. There is something somewhat nostalgic for original animation here. You're getting a lot more like film grain of things that were actually drawn on paper and then filmed with an actual camera, which gives you a lot of detail, versus the remaster version just kind of smoothing everything out and all the lines going away, unless they're extremely prominent, and you just have a lot more blobs of color versus feathering and mixing of colors. And certainly the color gamut widens on remastered things. So white is actually like a bright whiter, where drawing white on paper probably a lot of times is white paint that is an off-white. And yeah, I can't blame people for really thinking that this is the better way to watch things, but there is something nostalgic for the old way. And if it originally was created this way and this is just like some computer upscaling thing or autocorrection thing, then I wouldn't say this is better for that reason. It would have been better certainly if the image was the exact same image side by side for more detailed comparison. But yeah, you can also see how even the Japanese is just harder to read on that scale. That being said, I don't think... Okay, this came out in 1999, so this is an old game. Not just a new game in which they added an old style. This is one of those, I think, anime shows where you had transforming robots that or merging together vehicles to form a robot. But yeah, by now, like in 2026, I kind of had forgotten that that kind of show existed in the old days. Feels like the frame rate is off on the remaster too, a little bit. But yeah, the whole transformation sequence idea that I think was probably pioneered in a magical show pre-Sailor Moon. I wouldn't know specifically off the top of my head which one it was, but the whole transformation animation to kill time per episode got expanded, certainly when they tried to attract more boys by having robots transform. Otherwise it just doesn't make sense. Yeah. Now what's interesting here is it says the original game version, the original anime has been refined, which means like they changed something, but probably just, I imagine, sharpened it, or it said there was 8,000 sales, so it seems like they rescanned it, where the remaster seems to be only faithful to a Betacam footage. So maybe they rescanned the original cells and then the remaster was based off of a previous scan on Betacam. I'm not sure if that's really the case. It's frankly lucky for any old art piece to have the original cells accessible and in good enough quality to use. And you're sometimes lucky with Betacam, but honestly it's probably pretty hard to find a Betacam player to scan from it. There is a real relevancy issue, though, that's going to fall apart, particularly for the Western audience, in that nobody really knows GeForce. And if this actually originally came out in 1999, it was a throwback game even then, so we're now getting a remaster of a throwback game, which seems kind of weird in itself. Moving on, Dead or Alive 6 Last Round, the King of Fighters 14 collaboration trailer. It's funny to have two fighting games collaborating, and this feels like this is the first time we've heard anything about Dead or Alive as in a while. Yeah. And I think I'm probably never going to get into playing fighting games or have any interest in them. Yeah. I just don't see that happening. In fairness, if I was going to play a fighting game, I think Dead or Alive as a series might be the one I would be most interested in for plot reasons. And by plot, I mean cleavage. But yeah, I don't think that's a good enough reason either to get into the series or play a fighting game. It's funny, this game is not out yet. And so they're doing these kind of crossover collaborative events. Perhaps for Dead or Alive 6, not Dead or Alive 6 Last Round. It being called Last Round does imply to me that this probably is the last Dead or Alive game ever to be made, as Koei Tecmo and censorship in particular are probably adding a lot of pressure to stop trying to make fighting games with anime girls being so prominent and lewd aspects being so prominent. Which that's a shame, because that basically means there's an entire genre of female fighting games that cannot exist for fear of censorship, or they would have to be female fighting games where all the characters are intentionally drawn as ugly and matronly as possible, which would not be interesting either. But yeah, you can really see in this thumbnail how unimportant the male fighter characters are, and that they are just squished in the background. Let's see. Stupid Never Dies Styles gameplay. I don't know if Stupid Never Dies. I guess that's a whole new game, and it has nothing to do with the other game I'm thinking of that I don't even remember the name. Yeah, I remember this. This was like a weird thing where you were transforming into all kinds of different monsters, it looked like, in fighting. It does look pretty crazy. I wouldn't inherently describe a game as stupid, but without playing it. But yeah, wild and crazy, I think, is a fair descriptor. World Heroes Perfect Neo Geo Premium Selection Edition has been announced for PC. This is a new fighting game collection, I imagine. I added another cushion to my chair in the hopes that that would help. And I think it helped a little, but I don't think it helps perfectly. Yeah. Inherently, I think I'm getting slightly lucky. I like that art style, that's old school. In that when I'm playing Blueprints, after about an hour of playing, I've probably drunk enough water that I need to walk around and take a bathroom break anyways, and I think that is the real recommendation, is that I need to stand up every 30 to 60 minutes, and I'll almost never do it every 30 minutes, and just walk around. That'll help blood flow everywhere in my legs and my butt. But yeah, I think that's really the only thing that's going to help. Because, yeah, sitting for as long as I am these days really is starting to become a pain. And day to day, I imagine it's just building up and causing it to get worse. I saw also heat and cold therapy might be a viable thing too. Which I suppose I could sit on like a blanket, a heating blanket, and turn it down real low and see what that feels like. Yeah. I really like this art style, and I kind of like this character design too. Just a simplistic Japanese karate black belt type character. Even like the military bad guy, I assume this is a military bad guy character here. Not too wild and crazy. This guy's wild and crazy. And fantasy girl there. It might very well speak to how maybe these old games took it as far as it really needed to go, and now games are taking it too far with their hyper-realistic 3D graphics. You can definitely see that there are a lot of characters here that are archetypes and wild and crazy characters of some sort. But yeah, I don't think they're particularly too offensive in their old school design styles. Moving on, Bubblegum Galaxy Study Mode update is now available for PC. Okay, I don't know what Bubblegum Galaxy is. It's a game that's rated 100% positive from March 11th. Still don't really know what the game is though. Guess I'll put it on the wish list anyways. Which that's probably a mistake. City builder puzzle indie strategy game. Yeah. So some kind of puzzle game of some sort, but then it has this 3D environment, office environment, which might just be more of a menu section. Speaking of updates, when I exited out of Blueprints, it did update with an accessibility mode, which in fairness, I think it is nice that it's added that, but there is a slight danger in that if you do some of the accessibility modes, it is going to make it easier to recognize where puzzles are and make it easier to quickly across the room recognize that that is the thing in a room you're supposed to focus on, versus without accessibility mode, part of the challenge there is to look at everything and figure out what is important and what isn't. But yeah, I don't think it wins the game for you or anything like that by having accessibility mode on. I actually turned on several accessibility features just for the benefit of my viewership. But yeah, I would rather the puzzles be easier because of accessibility mode than make it impossible for people to actually solve some puzzles, which honestly I think colorblind people would have no way of solving some of the puzzles in Blueprints without the accessibility mode. There's still things that definitely could be updated and improved upon. A checkpoint system and the ability to exit without ending a day, still one of them. But yeah, also just a better system in the save file to tell you how many secrets you found, so you have an idea of how many secrets are left to find, like the witness does. It would be very helpful. Moving on, Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 PSVR 2 update is now available. This guy is calling in virtual reality. It is interesting that we're getting an update for a 2024 version of the game, but honestly, I don't know if Microsoft Flight Simulator comes out every year with a new version anyway, so that might be the newest Flight Simulator game. Yeah. Overall, we can see this is mixed, though. Well, it is more popular these days. I don't think you're ever going to really get over that mixed reviews. It's only 76% popular in the last 30 days of reviews, too. This is another genre of game where I don't think I'd ever actually get around to playing it. Simulator games in particular, not really good reason to play a lot of them. But yeah, that is a niche audience. Enter the Chronosphere launches in early access on May 14th. It's a turn-based tactical bullet hell game. Yeah, I don't think I've seen this before. As far as this trailer. Yeah, I might actually be a little sick today, too. Although the coughing is just normal for me. More and more are having these days every few months where I'll wake up absolutely shivering in bed and just like super cold, maybe also sweating. Yeah. And yeah, I don't know if it's humidity and temperature and air conditioner problems or not being programmed right, or if it is possibly something wrong with me, which is very believable too. A railway management simulation game, Steam to Electric, has been announced for PC. Here is a great example of a very natural name of a game that would have Steam in it. And I assume Steam, the storefront, is not going to have any real problem with having Steam in your name of the title of your game. I will say, I don't find these voxel graphics particularly interesting. Yeah. I don't think I would pick this game to play as far as a railway tycoon game, just because of the voxel graphics. I don't know why they're pushing voxel graphics. Like, it never looks good. A Joe Richardson adventure game anthology, The Immortal John Triptych, has been announced for modern consoles, Xbox One, Switch, and PC. I don't know who Joe Richardson is. This looks like the animations from Monty Python. But I don't think that any of the animators from the Monty Python show would probably still be working. The anthology collections features titles Four Last Things, The Procession of Calvary, Death of the Reprobate. So that's 3 games. They are point and click adventures, it looks like. So these might just be a series of point and click adventure games that have been out before, but I feel like I would have seen them and taken note of them if I've seen them before. I've seen a few games in this kind of Monty Python-esque style. I don't know if there really is a better style. Like, there almost certainly is an art style here that this is emulating, but I don't know what you would really call it. But yeah, I feel like these games are just brand new games being sold as a trilogy, perhaps because the point and click stories themselves were fairly short. Which, in fairness, I guess a lot of point and click games might be more interesting if they were a little bit shorter and they were just in trilogies. That there definitely was a lot of filler content in like the Broken Sword series. So if you'd taken the story of Broken Sword 1, 2, and 3 and that was just sold as a trilogy, and each of those stories were like 5 to 6 hour experiences instead of potentially 20-hour experiences, which is how long I guess it would probably have taken to beat Broken Swords 1, 2, and 3 each. That might work a little bit better in modern times too, in particular. Yeah, it is kind of amazing how the desire has fully flipped now in my mind, and their value per hour of gameplay is just not something I care about at all. I want a good experience in a smaller amount of time, not a longer amount of time, and I don't want a game that's going to make me grind or repeat things when I feel like that would be a thing. See, and weirdly on Steam it seems like each of these games are their own separate games, and then this DLC is just extra stuff. I don't even really have a way of putting DLC on my follow list, it seems. Like, weirdly, there is no follow list option for DLC. So yeah, this came out in 2020, Procession of Calvary. And then it's kind of bundled, although there's a fourth game here. It's overwhelmingly positive. Has its own thing. And it's published by Akupara Games, which is close to Annapurna Games, but not the same company. I'm reading it. This one came out in 2017. It's overwhelmingly positive too. So it's really just a rebundling with some extras of the previous games, which is not a bad thing too for point and click games. Although in this case it feels like each of those games are completely separate compared to like the rebundling that this Deponia did, where Deponia had episodic games where the story was continued in episode 2, and then they bundled them and resold them as one big collection of all the episodes. But then they kept on selling the individual games too, so it confused the market, I think, more than they should have. Moving on, Blood Refreshed Supply for Switch 2 launches May 7th. It's currently available for everything else. I don't think that is me rewriting it. I think that is literally the sub-headline. This is a mixed reviewed Doom style game, which would explain why it's not on the follow list. Subnautica 2 launches in early access on May 14th, priced at $29.99. Gravelord launches May 21st. It's a fast-paced boomer shooter. watching too many trailers. And see, even watching trailers, it's like 5 seconds of logo in front of every trailer. So 5 seconds per game is just getting wasted. Right, I'm gonna... Whoa. This is playing. I'm gonna mute myself and just run to the bathroom and adjust my chair a little bit because, yeah, this is getting ridiculous. So yeah, I'll be back in just a minute. I'm not even gonna pause the video. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. Swapped out pillows. Yeah, I'm just increasingly getting to a huge amount of uncomfortableness in my chair. Maybe it is the air inflator itself, just the alternating pressure pad not filling up or going flat. And that might be the problem too, is it's just going flat after a couple hours of setting. Yeah, it shouldn't do that, but I'll check on it. Anyways, Subnautica 2, I guess we put it on the follow list. Yeah. But yeah, like I said previously, I just don't know if I want to be embroiled in huge amounts of hostile work environment products. At some point, maybe it supports the victims of a hostile work environment, or at some point it might just encourage more hostile work environments by buying this game. I'm not sure. Alright, let's see. The vehicular action game Truck-kun is supporting me from another world has been announced for Xbox Series and PC. It is interesting. Clearly this is a joke anime inspired product. I don't know if it actually is what I would describe as anime. You play as a truck that isekais people into another world. The joke there is that so many anime isekai shows start with somebody getting hit by a truck and then dying in the real world, as it were, and waking up in a fantasy world. Often the fantasy world having some kind of video game feel to it or aspect to it, like it is a simulation or something. But yeah, I'd say the animation style doesn't really scream actual anime. And yeah, this does feel more like a troll joke game where you're just driving around. Yeah, and it's actually low polygon stuff. Yeah. So the gameplay mechanic itself may not be the worst idea ever, in that you're driving a truck and the more things you hit, the more resources you possibly get. But it seems like you might be hitting things and actually throwing enemies at the other character too for them to grind on. Yeah, that definitely seems like a joke game, not something I would assume is gonna be a breakout hit. If it is a breakout hit, it's going to be a streamer bait style breakout hit, as it were. It's not going to be something that people legitimately will want to play. And I'm really struggling to just have enough side tables. I need more side tables going on. Yeah. Moving on, dinosaur stealth survival horror game Wilder Dark has been announced for PC. Seems like we're going to potentially get several dinosaur games in the next year or two, which very few of these dinosaur games ever come out to any real excitement. Like, I just don't think people are that excited about dinosaurs. Even when, like, Jurassic Park as a movie was at its height, I think Steven Spielberg and just cinematic CGI for the first time was way more exciting than the actual dinosaurs being shown. We've had, in the past few years, fairly consistent Jurassic Park sequel movies, and I don't feel like people are hyped or interested to talk about any of those things. Video game wise, there has been a almost complete lack of dinosaurs in video games, except for Dino Crisis from many years ago. And yeah, not really a lot of demand for dinosaurs to show up. Usually if there is a dinosaur that shows up, like there's a dinosaur in Bulletstorm, I think, but it's a boss creature. It's not the thing that is the main focus of the whole game. Or there's like dinosaurs that show up in some of the early Lara Croft games, but they aren't the main focus of those games either. Extremely OK Games announces a platform adventure game called City of None for PC. Yeah, platform adventure games, is that what the other game was that came out like 6 months ago. Sequel to another game. I can't remember the name of it now. Yeah, there's a lot of people talking about that game, and now I cannot even remember what its name is, which I think really just goes to highlight that there's basically for all of last year the Expedition 33 conversation is the only thing I even remember now. City of None, looking at that trailer, looks fine. It's maybe a little low scale with the characters really small and pixely. But that could still work fairly well. I assume this is dinosaurs and something magical. Yeah, I saw somebody who was talking about how millions of years ago a single bacteria figured out how to turn the carbon monoxide, I think, or dioxide in the air into oxygen, or turn something in the air into oxygen, and that one bacteria just managed to kill off almost all life on the planet because oxygen was just poisonous to all the creatures and plants at the time. Which, yeah, it definitely felt like, to me, that's an example of where if we did find alien life, extraterrestrial life, there's a decent chance it's not going to be carbon based and it's not going to breathe oxygen or do well in an oxygen environment. Even humans who do live in an oxygen environment aren't doing super well in a oxygen environment. There's actually very little oxygen in the air, and even with the amount of oxygen, there is iron rusting like crazy, iron oxide, which, if we weren't in an oxygen environment, iron would not be able to rust. Some other metals might be able to rust in some other oxygen, other gaseous environment, or liquid environment in particular. Yeah, if we really were to find extraterrestrial life, we'd probably find it on an ocean planet, full in the deep bowels of the ocean, or it would be intelligent life that found us. Here's the Famitsu sales numbers. Honestly, at this point, I'm kind of tired of pointing out the same old, so let's just make it short. Nintendo Switch is still doing hugely well. It will continue to do hugely well. PlayStation is struggling in Japan as far as software and hardware sales, and Xbox is not selling anything. This is the status quo and would probably not change anytime soon unless there was a huge backlash against Nintendo for some reason, which is really what it would have to be, or some huge love for Sony, which I doubt could ever really happen. Let's see, Cordyceps, the first Saturn tribute, launches July 30th for PC worldwide, and then September 8th for PS5 and Xbox Series and Switch in the West. Interesting. But the console versions are only coming to the West. Or there's just a rather complicated release schedule there. Here's another example of a thumbnail art that is very different from the actual game art. Yeah, I'm surprised here. And yeah, one of these cards is showing some behind. And that is just like a shockingly different level of art styles there. It keeps on happening. The Resident Evil movie teaser trailer, we talked about it. Again, I'm not going to play the trailer. Star Wars Galactic Racer launches October 6th. A new racing game. Not quite exclusively pod racing, but Star Wars racing I think would potentially succeed if there's enough Star Wars fans left. And they are the same kind of Star Wars fans that previous Star Wars fans were, which I'm not sure that's true either. The Nacon Connect 2026 is set for May 7th. Updates, announcements, and surprises are abound. But remember, this also, I believe, is them just rescheduling announcements while they're going through bankruptcy. Previously planned for March 4th. So, yeah. I don't really trust that we'll ever see this connect. Atmos Far launches in early access on May 20th. It's a sky-high cooperative survival game being dated. And I'm really happy to have swapped over to another different pillow because that was getting ridiculously distracting. Like every minute or so, I was adjusting myself in the chair and feeling really uncomfortable. Yeah, and I think instead of trying to get back to play Blueprints after this afternoon, I may very well just take an extra few hours off to avoid sitting in a chair longer. A dark fantasy roguelike deck builder, Rogue Reigns, has been announced for PS5, Xbox Series, Switch, PC, iOS, and Android. That's a thought. Maybe I could find some kind of like a crazy inversion table. I saw Slick Deals. They've been doing these giveaways every day for usually fairly weird stuff, and they were doing a giveaway where you could win an inversion table. And yeah, I would never actually invert myself in an inversion table, but if one could lean back in that and be more upright, that might be an interesting experience. In Babylon 5, there was an alien species that slept at a 45-degree angle, so instead of lying down at a 180-degree angle. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking. But also that would be really expensive if I actually had to pay for one. And yeah, I know I'm not as bad as some people. I met one person that was a paraplegic in a wheelchair, and he was constantly just up moving his electric wheelchair just back and forth, and I don't think he was doing it just to maintain circulation. I think he was just in constant pain. Atmosphere. It's not on my follow list, but I'll put it on there now. Yeah. And anybody who's suffered any amount of consistent chronic pain will tell you that it starts to be self-absorbing and all you can think about, and it just affects everything. It can easily turn somebody who's a nice person into a jerk very quickly. And most of the doctor's solutions involve just giving you addictive pain pills. And that's as far as they know how to solve the problem or care to solve the problem. Most surgeries don't help with pain. Most other treatments don't help. Moving on, Nightmare Operator will be playable at Bit Summit Punch. Alright, I'll leave it at that. Popo Crois creator Yosuke Tamori dies at the age of 74. The esteemed creator passed away on April 10th. I don't know this Popo Crois. Manga artist and novelist to create Polo Crois. Why is Gamatsu mentioning her? Or him? I'm not sure. 1996, Sony Computer Entertainment released a video game version of Polo Crois for the original PlayStation, which spawned multiple sequels. It received 2 anime adaptations in 1998 and 2003. Tamori also published various other manga and picture books in his career. So, I guess it is slightly video game news since a couple of PlayStation games were made. These might very well have been games that only came out in the East. Because yeah, I don't recognize this name at all. Which is odd to me certainly, but probably shouldn't be that odd. I imagine there's a lot of manga artists and a lot of Japanese only games that I would have never had the opportunity to know about, even as somebody who is pretty well informed on those genres of art. And certainly I imagine it sucks for anybody to hear that apparently there was a whole manga series and some video games based on the manga series and some animes based on them, and you haven't heard about any of them, and now the person who made them is dead, so there won't be any more of them. Or at least it's unlikely there'll be more of them. That's a weird time to hear about somebody. And I would prefer artists to be appreciated in their own lifetimes and not only get news press after they've died. That's the sleazy thing about like painters, where their paintings wouldn't sell for anything while they're alive, but then somebody might swoop in and pay quite a bit at auction during the estate sales of those painters, or and it is crazy that the values of paintings tend to skyrocket after the artist dies, if the artists are actually good. I imagine plenty of painters out there have terrible paintings and their value's not going to go anywhere when they die. I guess there is a decent argument that many people are just going to be painters for recreation and not painters for actual exaltation is the word I want to use. That's the wrong word. Commercial sales. Anyways, Kyoto Xanadu details more characters, action cards, support cards, and ether. If I want to scroll down this page, looks like a JRPG or visual novel game. I'm not a huge fan of yellow, but I like the accents of yellow in this outfit. It stands out without being too crazy. Is this a game that actually is going to come to the West? I don't know. I'm not seeing any English version of it. English screenshots. I do like that Gamatsu talks about Japanese games, but it does potentially lose any relevance. And with my new plugin code that I added to close games that don't support the English language, that tab probably auto-closed itself for that game. Utawa Romono, past and present rediscovered, details more characters and Battletown systems. This, I imagine, will come to the West. But you never know, and you never know if it's actually ever going to come to PC. That's an interesting question that occurs to me is, I don't know if I'm really a fan of the beastkin type creatures in fantasy stories, or elves in particularly in fantasy stories. Yeah. Maybe I'm just a little bland and just a fan of humans in a medieval world more than a real fantasy world where elves will exist and trolls and beastkin. Yeah, actually, we don't see trolls very often. And a lot of times it's just magical abilities for human or nearly human characters. Like in this case, this is probably an elf girl of some sort, but I'd assume this is human and this is human, and these bunny ears on the headband imply human, but maybe is a bunny creature. This is the Alchemist of Ars Magna, coming to the PS4 and 5 on September 7th. It's currently already available for Switch and PC. I can hear my stomach growling from that bad breakfast decision I made. Sunsoft announces a car chase action revival called Route 16R for Switch and PC, alongside classic re-releases of some other game, I imagine not called Route 16R. A cel-shaded co-op first-person shooter, All Eyes Above, has been announced for PC. I kind of like this logo, but I wouldn't even think this logo in any way spells out the word All Eyes Above. You can see maybe an A here and maybe an A here, but you really would have to squint to see that as an E. And then, while the logo is interesting, the background feels fairly distinct and not showing too much, and the characters' designs are incredibly boring. Just repetition upon repetition. For a co-op game, I imagine that might be somewhat necessary. So Route 16 Turbo looks like this, and so I'm going to put this on the fall list only because I am wondering if there are any 1985 era Sunsoft fans that would actually want to play this game. And I feel like these games, when they get announced, should just tell the price for some old game that's just being emulated. The Alchemist of Ars Magna from 2023 is 80% positive, but it only has 30 user reviews, so you can see it's not really relevant enough to be on my fall list or wish list. Route 16R is the new take on that concept, and it too does not look interesting. So uninteresting, I'm not even going to make a YouTube short on it or pretend to do that. And then All Eyes Above. Yeah. Doesn't really catch my interest either. Yeah. I saw a YouTuber make a video really saying how it has become, unfortunately, the industry standard for games to co-op games, in particular looter shooters and things like that, to be churned out and sacrificed on an altar of potential profit and progress, and that we are now just getting 2 or 3 co-op games every month, and most of them are failing. But it's probably a good thing, because eventually these game companies are going to have to learn that you can't just make a co-op looter shooter and make massive amounts of progress, and you can't just copy the 1 or 2 examples of success in this industry and follow the leader effectively towards success. Unfortunately, I think that may work more often than it should. Moving on, Tales of Eternia Remastered has been rated in Europe. It might be the next Tales of series remaster. Here we can see a kind of pencil drawn old school animation. I wish more people around the world had the ability to draw images this way with colored pencils, instead of just immediately going to 3D CGI stuff. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a new Tales of game. They come out fairly frequently. Dragon Quest XI as Echoes of the Elusive Age Definitive Edition has been rated for the Switch 2 in Taiwan. Okay, and Dragon Quest release. We can see that 11S Definitive Edition on Steam is very positively reviewed. I don't know why it's not overwhelmingly positive at 92%. There is apparently a swapping here between the old games art style and the newer art style. Yeah, I don't think I would really swap from this newer 3D mode back to a 2D mode, since I don't have any nostalgia for Dragon Quest X. Yeah. Moving on to gaming on Linux. Let's burn through these quickly. Good Old Games is going to bring Polish history to the... is it Polish or Polish? I think it's Polish. Do you spell Polish and Polish the same way? Yeah, I'm not sure. But Good Old Games brings Polish history to the preservation program along with a big sell. Good Old Games. Definitely only getting press when they add something more to their preservation program, and the sales are barely even mentioned there. I don't know these games, so as far as I know, they could be Polish games. This Mazinka is a Polish train simulator. So it seems like they kind of also struggled to find a theme to connect the games they were adding to the preservation program. A retro strategy game, Crush, Kill, and Destroy 1 and 2 are going to get major updates with online play. Here we can see this is rated fairly positively, and this looks very much like a real-time strategy command and conquer type game with maybe more bugs in it, and some interesting live action face mask work too. I still have plenty of command and conquer games themselves for me to play, and StarCraft is still not available on Steam, so I don't think I would really go out of my way to play something from 1997 that I don't have any nostalgia for. And yeah, command and conquer style games, real-time strategies in general take too long, so it's not like I can really do a deep dive on these types of games. Let's see, Subnautica 2 Early Access was confirmed for May 14th. We got that story before. Here's Crush, Kill, and Destroy 2. The fact that an old game from the 90s has a sequel also means absolutely nothing, because a lot of these games are designed to have sequels, and the sequel is basically released within a couple months, if not at the same time as the original game. Let's see. Linux Mint is going to begin shipping HWE, that is hardware enablement ISOs for better hardware support, with the Linux Mint team now taking extra time between releases to providing new hardware enablement ISO downloads with newer Linux kernels. This will enable you to download the current release of Linux Mint but get support for newer hardware along with bug fixes from later versions of the Linux kernel. It's a good idea and nice middle ground between releases. So feels like they announced that they were going to take longer to release releases, and then now they've said actually we're going to just be rebranding what some of the releases are as being more alpha experimental updates, without actually adding any new features. And it does kind of feel like they are separating out a release as having some kind of new features versus a hardware enablement version that will just have updates that can be applied. Although usually in distros it seemed like in the past it was really hard to go from one Linux kernel version to another. So them going from like 6.14 to 6.17 sounds like that would be easy, but it really isn't, because it usually means almost everything wants to consider updating at that point. Moving on, SteamOS 3.8.3 beta gets ready for Steam Machine and Steam Controller. There's also a new stable version 3.7.22. Bunch of bug fixes along with more prep work. And then a long list here. I heard that some Linux setups on laptops run into this bug where if the battery runs to 0 on the laptop, the Bluetooth controller will go into a bad state, which is very believable for wireless connectivity, and you have to basically let all the capacitors drain out and fully hard reboot your computer at that point to get the Bluetooth to work. Yeah, that seems like something that the Steam Deck has had a long time problem with too, is Bluetooth connectivity. Yeah. In a lot of ways, I think this new beta is just a culmination of a lot of small updates, which most of the betas are just small updates. This longer list perhaps indicates that SteamOS version 3.9, it might be around the corner. I don't think they're quite ready to go to version 4.0, but I could certainly see them say version 4.0 is what ships on a Steam machine. Let's see, NVIDIA GeForce Now gets more games and RTX 5080 power expands. I don't really care about NVIDIA, but the article is here on Gaming on Linux if you're interested. Don't know what Global Rescue is. I'll put it on the file list. I don't know why we're saying it. Sandbox, people are really not happy with that. You can get some early Star Wars deals with nice discounts on good old games. I think I probably own all the Star Wars things, but maybe I don't. I may not own like the most recent Lego Star Wars game, which I haven't played a Lego game in a long time. It honestly wouldn't be a bad thought to see if I have a few more of those to play. I think I do. It'd be a nice way to make some footage without having to think too much. Nice way to contrast playing blueprints. Of course, that would also take me one more step further away from going back to Resident Evil 2 remake, which that would kind of suck. And there was just like no way that I'm gonna jump between those two games either. I'm gonna just focus exclusively on Blueprints and then hope months later to go back to Resident Evil 3 and hope I remember everything from Resident Evil 2 remake, which I won't really. So yeah, I really screwed myself starting a second New Game Plus there. What I probably should do is discard the 2 or 3 episodes I have of the second New Game Plus in the series at the end of the first playthrough in the credits, and then start over fresh later on for Resident Evil 2 remake. Anyways, Star Wars Galactic Racer releases October 6th. Industria 2 was one I wanted to actually be successful. Unfortunately, 48% tells me it's not going to be successful. And that just happens. Yeah. It is kind of crazy to even begin to hope that the majority of games would be good. You can save some epic games on Capcom Masters Bundle at Fanatical, which, yeah, who doesn't own Resident Evil 4 already? Some of these other games I probably don't own, but I imagine I own too much of them to even find like 2+ games, let alone 4+ games. Build your own bundle. Do I care about Busbound? I'll give it a follow. Oh, no, I'll make a YouTube short on it. The Nintendo 64 emulator, Gopher 64, has gotten even easier to use. Yeah, should be now easier than ever to use. Only recently they added support for retro achievements, and now back with even more things. That being said, I think most people are going to have front ends and launchers that would launch Gopher 64 and other emulators. You're not likely just going to have Gopher 64 opened up and then clicking the open ROM button. Yeah, it would be crazy if any of the emulators didn't have command line options that could be passed to them so that a launcher could do that, whether the launcher is something like Emulation Station, which is not even really the launcher that is most popular these days. I still think I like it better than the other options, but I haven't really played with the other options. Conan Exiles. We were talking about that previously in the last stream. Yeah, I still feel like Conan games should be more 1 versus 1 brutal combat, not top-down strategy games. Peak developers support Make-A-Wish with charity bundles through Digifile. We talked about that story though. Yeah. Feel like maybe we're getting some repetition here. Germany's Sovereign Tech Agency launches the Sovereign Tech Standards to support open standards. This would be, I guess, another effort for open source and, frankly, for not US-based companies controlling tech and the internet. Hunt down overtime. Let's see. Game Maker is launching GMRT, a new modern runtime with source access. Yeah. I still don't really consider people who use Game Maker or RPG Maker, which is really all Game Maker is based off of, as doing best at the best they could do to make games. And it feels very much like using Game Maker is just leaning on a crutch and pigeonholing you into a way that you'll never really have the skills to make a amazingly successful, unique game that plays in a different way. Game Maker is really only good for doing so much. You can kind of see in this screenshot, just while there's some stuff on the screen here, there's actually a lot less options on the screen than Godot would offer, or Unity or Unreal would offer. It also makes a lot more sense that if you are going to make a platforming game, Godot and using open source engines makes a lot more sense. I thought when it was GMRT, I thought it was going to be Game Market, where they were just going to have people selling assets, which I imagine that may already exist, where you're selling assets. I have no idea as far as this new runtime, whether it would be much better. It might be much better. It might be better than Godot. It kind of doesn't matter in my mind though, because the thing is, Game Maker is targeting like teenagers and younger. It's targeting little kids that want to make video games but actually don't have the education, skill, or even attention span to make games the proper way with a proper engine. And so, much like Roblox, it's just kind of pushing people into falling into a delusion that using Game Maker will be the way to succeed, when the vast majority of games that do get put on Steam that look like an RPG Maker game or Game Maker game are not going to sell and not really likely to ever succeed. Yeah. JavaScript being a language you can use in programming is a red flag to me, because JavaScript has never been known for being particularly performant. C# is probably fine. I don't even know TypeScript well enough, but I've never heard of anybody using TypeScript to make video games. They are also trying to be a master of all, jack of all trades, master of none, in that they're focusing on desktop, mobile, and web. But yeah, I guess good luck to them is the only thing I can really say. Is that, see if this new engine does catch people's attention. I doubt it would be successful and catch people's attention though, because it's still closed source. I assume it's still closed source. Let's see, Rocket League adds easy anti-cheat with the Steam Deck and Linux still being supported. This is Epic Game Store now owning the company that makes Rocket League. Which is a interesting thought, in that there might be this case where Steam Deck and Steam machines get easy anti-cheat support, and then we start to see more easy anti-cheat games playing on those hardware, but not generally being playable on other Linuxes, which still would be a problem for people installing like Bazzite Linux and or building their own Steam machines. But it's a step in at least the right direction towards playability and compatibility. You can see Rocket League on Steam is mixed reviewed these days, and a decent number of people still playing it. I don't believe you can actually buy Rocket League on Steam anymore. Yeah, it has been pulled down and is an Epic Game Store exclusive now, so the experience of launching Rocket League and playing it on Steam is probably playing with 29,000 really experienced players who have played it for hours upon hours, versus playing it on the Epic Game Store might give you some fresh blood and let the new players have a chance. Let's see. Proton Experimental has been updated to get Crimson Desert working again on Linux and SteamOS. Seems like that was the only thing. I think that was a hot fix. That brings us to GameDevelopers.com. Rebellion's Atomfall is being turned into a TV series. Two brothers Harvey and Jack Williams are leading the adaptation. Yeah. That could be anything, certainly. Like, I don't think The Last of Us TV series is inherently going to be anything like The Last of Us games as it goes further and further along. And I think increasingly we are going to have TV shows named after video games that only take a loose premise. And that might very well be the better way to do it instead of trying to do a faithful recreation of the experience. The Fallout TV series, I think, is really setting the precedence there, where you can have something, do some visual homages here and there, but then really have the story be completely different from what a Fallout game's story would be, and have the actions that happen in the Fallout TV series be pretty different from what an experience of playing a Fallout game would be. Let's see. GameMaker has also incorporated Claude code to enable AI-assisted workflows. So yet another example of GameMaker making it too easy for wannabe game developers to create something for them to not come to the reality and realization that while they're using AI-assisted workflows, they're actually not creating themselves, and they're not learning, and they're never going to be able to create anything as they're vibe coding around. So yeah, I don't want to go on a long rant again, but I definitely wouldn't let anybody I know start developing in GameMaker. That would be very bad for their career in the long run, I think. Claude Code in particular is interesting because I believe Claude Code was the large language module that deleted a company's entire database in a matter of a couple of minutes of it being implemented, and deleted all the backups. Yeah. So yeah, they effectively ruined all of the backups. Although I think some companies are going to claim AI deleted all the backups and code just because they've been cooking the books and they're afraid of getting caught. Yeah. Yeah, there almost certainly is going to be some kind of tax evasion lawsuit that happens where they're going to claim AI deleted all the evidence. Sony clarified the confusion around the DRM game licenses on PlayStation for digital games. And then here's a quote: "The company as a whole no longer exists. Greedfall developer Spiders confirms its closure." Xbox delivered record monthly active users, but hardware revenue was still in decline. So people were playing games, they just weren't buying hardware, and they were buying software, but not enough software to outpace the decline of sales from hardware. Anyways, that brings us to all the new games on Steam. Same old rules. I'm going to try and rush through it fairly quickly. When I swipe down, I'm closing a tab because I have no interest in it, or in this case, because I've already checked the follow list and the checkbox on it, so I've already dealt with it. If I find something really interesting, I'll put it on the follow list and then swipe to the side to leave the tab open. Come on. Is it going to work? Apparently not. To move to the next tab is what that swiping to the side should have done. Maybe it's not going to work today, which that's going to slow down the whole process too. The whole idea of these gestures is to speed up the thing. if I'm not super interested in the game, but I do think it deserves a YouTube short. If I ever get back to making YouTube shorts, I will swipe it to the side without putting it on the follow list. There we go. Swiping started working then. And yeah, I am just increasingly trying to rush through these games. Our bad ending. I felt like this game came out before, or I don't know, maybe there was some other story by a similar title. Is this a digging game or is this a platformer game? It looks like a platformer game. I wouldn't expect too much from it, but who knows? I don't know why my gestures are not working sometimes. Yeah. We're always trying to be hopeful as we look at a lot of new games that come out. We're excluding things that are labeled as having adult in nature content, and we're excluding games that don't support English in any way. That might be something of interest. I think we could probably say all of these live action Chinese visual novel games are no longer of interest. I mean, you can see this is very positively reviewed, but it just doesn't have any real relevance to me. I don't think there's any scenario where I'd actually play these games. They are the closest thing to porn I think that Chinese companies can actually make, which is not very close to porn. And yeah, next time I actually do a follow list cleanup, I think I might make a special effort to remove all of those from the follow list, and if there are any on the wish list even, which I guess this year I'm probably not going to spend a lot of time trying to do wish list or follow list cleanups, because I don't think I'm even going to be engaging with sales that much. Yeah. And yeah, it's the wrong kind of motivation to want to rush through all these games just because I'm in pain in a chair. You know what? I think I'm probably just old enough at this point where I'm gonna have to start taking aspirin, Tylenol type things before each stream, just as a precautionary measure. Which, low doses, not overdoing it, haven't shown a lot of evidence of that being unhealthy for you. Yeah, I do think that is the only real solution. It is the basic solution everybody would tell you before you even saw a doctor is or have you tried Tylenol and aspirin over-the-counter pain medications? But I mean, that ain't right. There's a home inspector on YouTube that ends his shorts with "that ain't right," and if I can use that phrase, it really isn't right when your new potential normal is to just preemptively take pain pills. But yeah, there's no other solution. Unfortunately, the world is not full of guaranteed perfect solutions, particularly when it comes to health. But yeah, I need to really stop whining, for lack of a better term, about being in pain too. It's certainly not going to make these streams more appealing. But yeah, I don't know what in the world is going on with my channel right now. Like, basically nothing is coming out other than these live streams, and basically nobody is watching these live streams, and yet I am getting subscribers somehow. I don't know how I'm gaining subscribers. Probably, I guess maybe older content is getting views. That was the whole idea of spending 10 years making content, 10 plus years, was for the old content to actually matter and get views and help support new content. YouTube is really not designed for that to work. However, they may be changing their algorithm to make that work a little bit more. They haven't actually rolled out those 24-hour channel features, I think, yet, and frankly, if it is rolled out, it may only be to people who are watching on TV. Yeah. You can see I put a decent amount of games on the follow list. This, I suspect, might be AI generated. AA art for the cards. Yeah, any card game these days, there's a decent chance that the art is AI generated. I'm now adjusting myself in a way that I'm slightly leaning forward in the chair and kind of looking downward, and yeah, maybe I'm sitting back too much in the chair in general. That's very possible. Oh yeah, I guess before I think potentially about getting an inversion table, which really wouldn't work for me, I should remember that my chair actually is a lift chair, or rocket chair is what they're called, recliner. So I could have a very wobbly setup that probably would break at some point and lead to me flopping to the ground, maybe damaging the carpet underneath. Yep. I mean, Invincible Versus now mixed. Yeah, with 800 reviews. Yeah, I am a little surprised by that. Game should cost $20 value, isn't there? Also, the deluxe editions does include day one skins. Day one patch making the game actually work, apparently. Deluxe edition not showing up for a $70 game. Yeah. Underwhelming story that's beatable in about an hour. Injustice 1 and 2 have 5 hours each for your average beat times. 5 DLCs, with all but one being $10. US launched on day one. Deluxe edition gives barely enough anything for a $20 upcharge. Don't get any pre-order bonuses despite pre-ordering. The fighting is fun, but with how it is right now, it's not worth it. And see, this may have nothing to really do with Amazon Studios per se, and Amazon.com having the TV show. This probably is just Skybound being the publisher and Porter Up being hired to create the fighting game. I thought this game was going to probably be a flop anyways, because compared to the TV show, now none of these characters even show up. So or most of these characters don't show up, so I don't know why you would want to play as those characters in a fighting game. And maybe that highlights a problem that connecting a fighting game to a evolving narrative story is something that just really shouldn't happen. Yeah. I saw Game Grumps played a demo of this game, so I'll put this, I guess, on the wish list already and just jump ahead. Kind of a weird spin on a solitaire game. I think there's a lot more going on than just solitaire. We have a VR Ninja Turtle games, VR only, which would explain the low amount of reviews. And I'll take it off the follow list because honestly at this point I'm just not going to do VR. If I was to get into VR, I would just go and search the best, most recent VR games. This game is something that has just come out of early access. Yeah. I don't know if it's really a game I'd want to play though, so I'm going to leave it on the follow list. Antidote to Despair. Looks weird. Star Miner. Could be something. I'm just hoping to be done fairly quickly here. They're starting to see a lot more games that are already on the fall list and already have a check mark because they're just now coming out. Whereas the first 3 to 4 months really didn't have any of that. This looks like a rhythm game with some lewdness to it, I imagine. Yeah, I am certainly a fan of lewdness in a lot of art in games, but I imagine the censorship push and the arguments might happen a little less if people just kind of went out of their way to have more beefcake characters. Like, it is very much from the female attracted perspective that most of the characters are created. And even here, like not Indiana Jones, 007 First Light, I mean, you've got a young James Bond with a scar on his face, and I mean, he doesn't really look that attractive, and he's just kind of in a boring jacket and t-shirt. Yeah. Maybe this guy's showing a little bit more skin, but he's also, I think, with all the tattoos, supposed to be depicting himself as a bad guy. And then, yeah, you're seeing a lot more skin and cleavage here on a female character. Yeah. So I guess that's a long way of saying if I was in charge of making the next James Bond film, I would definitely have James Bond with his top off a lot more, which, in fairness, that is kind of how it went with a lot of the early James Bond movies too. Yeah. There's Hotel Architect. I guess I'll put it on the follow list. I'm not sure I'd ever really want to play another building architectural type game anytime soon, because Blueprints, even though it's kind of more of a puzzle game than an actual strategy game of actually designing a building, I still would suspect that I'm losing my train of thought here. Yeah, I don't think actually architecting anything else outside of a gameplay mechanic would really interest me. If I was going to do that, I would just use an actual architectural software, which there's a couple of softwares on Steam, like I think Room Designer 2 is one of them. Yeah. Wish there was a way I could figure out how to fully cover my mouth before coughing. Yeah. And of all the things that AI claims it can do, it is crazy that AI doesn't have a baked-in default or audio software, recording streaming software don't have a default plugin that would take out sneezes and coughs. Frankly, I would be very happy if there was a plugin that would also take out pauses and ums and ahs. But as far as I've seen, none of them even claim to be able to do that, let alone are actually successful at doing that. I did hear about some software, and then I immediately forgot it, that would grade you on your pronunciation of words, which sounds like that might be helpful if I could actually trust the AI software to accurately know the pronunciation of words, which I can't. So I feel like it would just push people down the path of mispronouncing things even worse. And a lot of times it's who you're around and what region you're in determines how things are pronounced in the United States. Other languages are more monocultures like than the US is. Alright, we're scrolling down the updates here to see if there's anything I really want to check out. And there isn't, so I'm just going to move on to end the show. That's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.